In three, two, one. Welcome back to Recruiter Radio, where recruiters talk about recruiting. Special guest this week is Chuck Waygood, Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Kong Inc., one of the hot startups out of San Francisco. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kyle. It's great to join you.
It's great to have you on. Now, we've known each other for a long time. We actually worked together at Hortonworks, which was a fun experience that I want to talk a bit more about. But the intent of the podcast is to engage with recruiters on meaningful topics for the industry and share thoughts on what makes it such a special function, what makes it such an important function, some of the challenges and some of the benefits that come from a career in recruiting. Now, you've been managing, hiring, developing large recruiting teams and running them through arguably some of the most challenging growth environments. I saw firsthand how crazy it was at Hortonworks, and those weekly update calls were, beyond the capacity of what I could imagine being able to run. And I wanted to unpick a little bit the thread around what makes a good recruiter from your experience, having managed, having hired, having trained so many recruiters over the years. What are your thoughts on recruiting as a function? What do you look for when you hire recruiters, and how do you keep them engaged, keep them challenged? There's kind of three questions there, but why don't we start with what do you look for when you're hiring recruiters as a function?
It's a great question. Obviously, there's a lot of different avenues that recruiters can come from. Um, I'd say the first half of my career I spent on the agency side of the house,
Mhm.
and so I tend to lean towards candidates that have a similar background as far as where they kind of learned the industry, how they learned the fundamentals of recruiting, um, how they developed the sense of urgency and ownership around recruiting. To me, that is a great foundation to then be able to build upon and then apply to in-house corporate recruiting. So I enjoy kind of coupling the two experience levels together. And then I've created a competency matrix over the years that I like to leverage when I'm not only interviewing talent myself, but then also doing performance reviews and things like that with my team. And there's a lot that I look for. There are obviously the technical skill sets of recruiting. And what I mean by that are, the ability to um, manage the whole requisition process from taking an initial rec and scoping the need, the profile with the hiring manager, owning that requirement and process all the way through, even partnering with the HRBP side to establish compensation levels and things like that. So that to me, I look at as some of the technical skill set that you have to have. In addition, the ability to understand your domain that you're working in, to articulate the domain that you're working in, and really be able to create a strong employee value proposition to be able to pitch a candidate on. You and I had talked a little bit earlier prior to us jumping on about recruiting almost being like a sales or marketing function.
Yeah.
And to me, you've got to have the ability to articulate a great message to a candidate. And you've got to understand what's important to a candidate to be able to articulate that message, right? And then, of course, with that, you have to be able to understand the space that you're working in, right? So I come from the technical world. I've always been in technical recruiting my whole career, and while I'm not technical by nature, I have an innate ability to kind of put together how the technology affects day-to-day life. So I speak more in use cases than I speak in technical terms. So I can really paint a picture to a candidate on what our tech is doing and the way it's impacting, whether it's the customers or even just the world in general, society in general. So I look for that in candidates. as well. I look for a strong level of business acumen because a big part of what we do in recruiting is stakeholder management. As you know,
Mhm.
you've got to be able to manage expectations on the front end, and part of that is setting those expectations correctly. So being able to have difficult conversations with stakeholders is critical to the success of a recruiter, I believe. Um, Being able to earn the respect of your stakeholders is critical, and a lot of that just comes from having a strong business acumen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I look at that. Obviously, the operational execution. So, what have they been able to execute against through the course of their career? Were they an overachiever? Can they speak to their overachievement? Can they speak to their process and their cadence that drove that execution and overachievement? So those are some of the technical things that I look for. But then, and Kyle, you know this, being on my team at Hortonworks, what's most important to me is kind of the DNA, the character attributes of a recruiter. So that's really
Yeah.
what's determined to me a long-term fit on my team. As you know, there are plenty of people out there who are great recruiters, um, but whether or not they can fit in a larger org and bring value across the team, it's a different skill set, right?
Mhm.
And as you had mentioned, where I've transitioned into building large recruiting teams. And to me, in that kind of environment, recruiting is absolutely a team sport. It's not an individual sport. And so I then look for the attributes from a DNA perspective that will support that teamwork type of mentality. And that's really where I can get into a lot of the psychoses of recruiters and where's their head at and what's important to them and what drives them and what motivates them and what are they passionate about. To me, if you're not passionate about recruiting, it's really hard to be successful at it.
Mhm.
So what are they passionate about? And that's really how I kind of then craft the, the team that works well together, really. So
Yeah.
that's what I look for in recruiters.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the technical aspect is something that is harder to to share from the perspective of what makes a good recruiter. The personality is interesting. You use the word psychosis. It's my theory that all recruiters are a little bit crazy, and if you're not doing it right because there is a passion for helping people, for developing that fit, bringing people together. In my experience, you have to be motivated by enabling that match, and so much goes wrong. In fact, it's a miracle anything gets done. That we make any placements in this industry.
So true.
It can drive you nuts. And I may be proof of that myself. But in terms of the personality, let's dig in a little bit more on that, if you could. Um, the passion for recruiting. I'm interested to hear where you've drawn the line around what makes sense for you as you hire recruiters. And what are some of those sample traits that you look for from a personality perspective, from a passion perspective, and where does the level of passion, what's the minimum that you look for when you're hiring a recruiter or when you're evaluating a recruiting partner for that matter?
It's a great question. When I think of passion, again, I think of what excites people. And you've got to be able to articulate to me what excites you about our job. As you had
Yeah,
mentioned, it's not easy. It's not for everyone. It's very, to me, it's very akin to being like an SDR, where you're constantly reaching out to people that don't necessarily want to hear from you,
yeah,
and you've got basically 10 seconds to then earn another 10 seconds, right? So you've got to be able to articulate that passion right off the bat
yeah.
and get somebody interested, at least compelled to the point where they're going to say, you know what, let's have a deeper conversation about this. So whatever excites you about the job, you got to be able to articulate that to me. So that's kind of my baseline, right? If you can't articulate to me why you do what you do, then what's going to keep you going when things get really hard in recruiting? What's going to keep you going when you're competing against Facebook and Google and Netflix every single day for top tier talent, right? And so if they can articulate that to me, then I can unpack it from there and really define whether or not that applies to our world, right? So like with me, um, it's interesting because I do love to build and run large recruiting teams, but then conversely, I love small, high growth startups, right? So what I try to find is that mix of get in early so that I can help build something big to then drive a greater mission. And to me, what inspires me and motivates me is the passion these entrepreneurs have around their mission. And when you can find entrepreneurs that truly are passionate about what they're doing and what they're solving, and then they've got a passion for their people that they want to bring on board to help them drive that mission, then that is something that I can really rally around, right? And I can teach that to recruiters, and I can teach and I can inspire them with what our greater good mission really is. And if somebody doesn't get excited by that, and a lot of times what I'll do during an interview with a candidate is I'll explain to them exactly what they're walking into, right? You are going to be drinking from a fire hydrant for the next 12 months. For the first 3 months, you're going to be wondering if this is even the right place for you because you can't figure out what to do day in and day out because there's so much information coming at you, right? However, if you can work through this and work with me and operate and execute against the plan that we put together, this place will take you through your career faster than you ever thought you could. And here's what's great about the place that we're working at. Here's what we're doing every single day. Here's the mission that we are working towards and what we're trying to solve. And as you can tell, I can get excited about that. And that excitement doesn't resonate with a candidate. You can see it right away.
Yeah.
And so I like to do video calls. I mean, I was doing video calls 8 years ago and back before pandemics and quarantines and even Zoom. So I've always loved the interview so where I can look at a candidate in the eye and see how they respond to my level of excitement. And if it doesn't resonate to them, then we're probably not going to be a right fit because I want to see that level of excitement from my team every single day. And whether you've got to put on your game face and fake it until you make it, whatever it is, I want to see it, right? Yeah. Because if you can't inspire me, you're not going to inspire a candidate. And if you can't inspire candidates, you're not going to be effective in this role.
Yeah, yeah, and to that point, my personal experience, to set the scene for people who don't know necessarily how challenging the searches were at Horton Works and at Kong for that matter. We were going after a very small sector of the market in the toughest territories with the most hard-ass candidates who, really didn't, as you said, they didn't want to hear from me. They didn't want to hear about, what was happening at this startup at that point. They wanted to continue to focus on making money. So it was a really tough, challenging assignment, by far the toughest I've ever been involved in. And what kept me going was a lot of the shared enthusiasm and shared passion. So is that fair to say that that was the key, or has been the key to your success as a recruiter, as a leader of recruiters, is that ability to share enthusiasm in a very short time frame and connect with people and engage with them and kind of pull them out of their chair and tip them off their seat? Is that really the secret to it?
I think that's definitely one of the secrets to it. I think the other secret is, and I don't know why I have this, but I have an ability to quickly build a relationship with my team members. And part of how I do that is just through transparency and genuine caring, um, and authenticity throughout. And I think that that resonates a lot with recruiters because the recruiting industry has a stigma of not being authentic.
Yeah.
So I think it's different, right? So I think that between the ability to motivate and inspire and stay positive through really difficult times galvanizes a team, right? And I think that one of the things when you can hire personalities that have that common thread of a positive, enthusiastic character, no matter who you are, there are days when you have a down day and you just need to reach out to somebody
Yeah.
and say, hey, can you pull me out of this funk? Because I really need to be able to rally right now. You know, what's good in your world, right? And so the team approach then lends to that greater good type of inspiration. And I think that a lot of times, you know, whether it's somebody jumping on the phone with me or somebody jumping on the phone with somebody else on the team, they would get that common message of, hey, I know this sucks, but keep cranking through it, man, because tomorrow's another day. And you know that the one thing about recruiting, it only takes one phone call to turn everything around.
It only takes one phone call, and sometimes a little bit of infectious energy from Chuck Waygood is all you need to take it through a tough quarter. Going back to your point about the industry and the stigma to it, elevating the industry is one of the things that I'm interested in doing. One of the reasons I started this podcast to talk to recruiters, besides the fact that recruiters generally are fascinating people. You know, they're charismatic, they're smart, they're savvy, they're a little bit of everything to everyone. Um, is that there needs to be, I think, an awareness of the fact that there's no barrier to entry. Any schmuck with a phone can call himself a recruiter. There is a lot of disingenuous people in the industry, and frankly, a lot of sociopaths who give the industry a bad name. Um, Elevating the industry is something that I want to get your thoughts on in terms of the standards, the integrity, the ethics. What's your take on the recruiting industry in general, and how you've differentiated yourself in the industry from the perspective of setting higher standards and being a better recruiter and enabling others to be better at their job.
Um, it's a great question. So, unfortunately, this is an industry that lacks any true barrier to entry. Like you said, any schmuck with a phone can spend $5,000 and get their own LinkedIn recruiter seat and be almost as effective as other people, right?
Mhm.
And it's a way to make really good money. So you have people who are motivated by money, and while I think we're all motivated by money, that can't be your sole motivator.
No.
But my fear is that the itch to make as much as you can in recruiting, it propagates a need for speed, right? And the challenge with speed, there's a fine balance between quality recruiting and speed, right? And it's hard because contingency recruiters don't get paid, obviously, until they get somebody hired. The challenge is recruiting, or hiring, I should say. Hiring is like a love relationship, right? I'm trying to build a very thoughtful company built to last, built for the long term, right? And unfortunately, that goes against the modus operandi of a contingency recruiter, right? So where I like to work is I prefer to work with a recruiter who we give a little bit of retainer up front to,
Mhm.
so that they're bought in, so that they're not just hyper urgent and just trying to cram candidates down our throat. They're trying to be thoughtful and find the right candidates, right? So there is that partnership that you can create with an external recruiter, but you got to do it the right way. You got to understand their motivations. You got to understand the way they operate and really what drives them. And you've got to look at them as a partner, right? So in Kyle, you and I have worked in both capacities before,
Yeah.
right? And what's important is to treat people externally like they would be internal employees, right?
Mm.
Um, and that goes a long way. And to me, when I first started building Hortonworks, and we were so heavily reliant on the external recruiting model, we went through probably literally 30 different sales recruiting agencies in
Mm.
the first 12 months. And what I found is most recruiters externally are just driven by that speed and that fast buck, right? They just want to make that placement and move on. Okay. It's the ones that took the time to understand my business, understand the culture of the organization I was trying to build, and understand how the different candidate profiles and competencies and character traits can enhance my culture and my company. It's those that invest in me that I will then invest back in. And those are the ones that elevate the industry, right? But unfortunately, there are very few of those. But when you find them, they can be a long-term partner,
Yeah.
and they're beautiful to work with.
It is. It is a beautiful thing. My theory is that recruiters are essentially creating a love match, and I mean that in the sense that when your client, when your hiring manager, when your stakeholder gets back to you and says, "I love this candidate," that's an indication that you have made a successful match and you've brought people together to create a love match. And this is the arguably the second most important relationship. Your work relationships are your second most important relationships in your life. And in some cases, the most important relationships in your life. A lot of people put more effort into their work relationships than their marriages. That's a truism. I think it maybe even the majority. That's a whole different subject to get into. But that's what motivates me, and I think we're on the same page here, and I think we're speaking the same language. But that really is what we're bringing. And tell me if this is way too out there for you, but we're basically bringing people together to create a love match.
It's absolutely true. I mean, when you think about a company, whether they have a perfect product market fit or not, if they don't have the people to build the engine and drive that engine, they'll never be successful. So companies need to look at hiring as their number one priority. Because if you don't have people, it doesn't matter how good your product is, right? So you gotta have the right people in place to be able to scale anything. So the challenge that a lot of organizations have is hiring is hard, right?
Yeah.
It's very nuanced. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment from hiring teams to create kick-ass teams.
Yeah.
And it's typically seen as, well, that's not my day job. My day job is to build this product, to take it to market. And it's like, okay, that's great, but you can't do that yourself, right? So if you don't have a team built to build that product, you're going to fail,
Mhm.
period, right? And if you're constantly in a reactive recruiting mode because you hire incorrectly and you don't invest enough on the front end, then you're never going to build the product that you need to take to market, and you're going to fail, right?
Mhm.
So the challenge is a lot of organizations see hiring as a necessary evil rather than what it should be, which is their number one priority,
Yeah.
right? So when you talk about that love match, you've got to be able to sit down with a hiring team and create that desire to invest heavily into the process and heavily into their candidates, so that they can elevate that level of commitment, right? Because if you don't commit to a candidate, why in the hell should they commit to you,
Mhm.
right? And vice versa. When you commit to a candidate, if that candidate doesn't commit back to you, move on.
Yeah.
Find somebody who's willing to commit to you and invest in you, and somebody who is curious and wants to know what drives you in the organization and what's important to you in that organization. Because if at the end of the day they don't care enough to really invest on the front end in determining if this is a long-term fit for them, then guess what? This is a transaction.
Mhm.
And hiring is not transactional,
No.
right? And it's unfortunate because so many organizations think that hiring is transactional. So many external recruiters think that hiring is transactional, and it then drives this transactional attitude and mentality in the candidates themselves. So we've created this whole transactional culture in what is probably the most nuanced and emotional and gut-wrenching decision people need to make in their lives,
Yeah.
right? So that's the challenge, is trying to elevate that level of awareness to, hey, slow down, invest,
Mhm.
build this thoughtfully, and everything else will come
Yeah.
across the board, regardless of who it is, the hiring manager, the recruiters, the candidates. You've got to be able to show that same level of investment to make it all work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful message, and spreading that message is really spreading the love. I'm getting too corny here. Stop me before I embarrass myself further. But we are agents of love.
We are. We are. I mean, there's nothing better to me than placing somebody in a role and then they call you back and say, Chuck, thank you so much because this changed my life and changed my family's life. And I will forever be indebted to you for helping me, putting me into this company, because it's completely springboarded my entire career. I mean, that is the most fulfilling thing you can get as a recruiter.
Yeah.
And vice versa with the hiring team. If you can help somebody build their team that drives a level of success that they hadn't seen before and has really helped them build an organization, I mean, that is an incredibly fulfilling type of experience for me.
It is fantastic. Well, I should let you get back to spreading the love, my friend. This is really, really important, to share this message and to continue to elevate the industry. But I really appreciate your thoughts and you sharing them. Keep up the good work. Keep spreading the love, brother.
I appreciate it, my man. You too, and good luck up there.
Thank you,
Hopefully
sir.
hockey comes back to us all, Kyle.